For a period of time after leaving Sword, he has had the same recurring dream of thorny vines ensnaring him, holding him back from the light he vaguely makes out in the distance. But no matter how deep these thorns break and cut into his skin, they fail to drag him back to the loathsome castle. A faint otherworldly voice appears in his head, though not to offer him spiritual guidance. Dripping with contempt, the unfeeling voice belongs neither to his father nor his people.
자기 분수도 모르다니. 가문을 벗어나면 자유를 얻을 수 있다고 생각한 것이냐. 무지한 오만함은 쉽게 부서지는 가면에 불과할 뿐이다.
시시하군.
He takes none of that to heart. That voice is from one of those cautionary threats he has long buried in his memories. Consider it an admonition from the gods of Sword then. Foreboding that he'll never find his freedom or lead his ideal life even after distancing himself from his family.
그게 중요한가?
He only left Sword because he didn't want to continue sinking into the abysmal mire. Even if the path ahead is fraught with thorns, even if it means he'll bleed every stop of the way, he would rather breathe his last chasing the light. A path dictated not by the gods, but one he could choose himself. Living room. A weekend afternoon in the living room of Vyn's old residence.
그녀와 관련된 사적인 질문만 삭제하면 다른 건 문제 없습니다.
네, 그 부분은 조정하겠습니다.
그럼 오늘 인터뷰는 방금 논의한 버전으로 진행 부탁드릴게요.
Vyn has recently made some research breakthrough on a mental disorder, so a medical journal team is here today to feature him in their issue. While you help decorate the interview prep room, Vyn has finished finalizing the overall flow and details of the interview with the host and is now walking through it you.
카메라 위치를 확인하는 건가요?
Nope, the cameramen have everything set up perfectly. I'm just here to check if this is the most flattering angle for you.
덕분에 오늘은 좋은 모습이 잘 담기겠네요.
Without a doubt. Here, let me fix your collar. Vyn lowers his head and leans into you, making it easier for you to reach around his neck to straighten his collar. Adjusting the overlapping pieces of Vyn's outfit, you decide to ask him about the bits of their exchange you overheard earlier. I thought I heard my name when you were running through the interview with the host. You're going to be talking about me in this interview? Vyn straightens up as a wry expression spreads across his face.
전에 공동 연구했던 팀원들과 함께 인터뷰할 때 언급한 적이 있어요. 코타르 증후군 연구에서 지금 같은 성과를 이룰 수 있었던 건 약혼녀의 지원 덕분이었다고요. 잡지사에서 그걸 인터뷰 원고에 넣은 걸 보면 가십거리가 필요했던 것 같아요. 근데 전 팀의 연구 성과 발표에 우리 연애사가 엮이는 건 원치 않아요. 그래서 당신이 연구에 기여한 부분에 대해서만 얘기하기로 했고 사생활에 관한 인터뷰는 거절했어요.
Yeah, this is an interview on your research project after all. It's only right to be serious and professional about it. But you frown in puzzlement as you try to think back to the time Vyn embarked on this research topic. As much as you are aware of Vyn's ongoing research on mental disorders, you have never asked or talked to him about those cases or the patients he sees. And it was only in your recent conversation that you heard him mention his research on Cotard syndrome, the very findings he will be sharing in today's interview. Did I really contribute to this research project? Why don't I remember anything like that?
혹시 임수빈 사건 기억하나요?
Yeah, I do, but shortly after you got to know Vyn, you worked together to help Vera free herself from the clutches of a PUE scheme syndicate. You even had to act as a couple back then. Seeing that you remember the case, Vyn smiled before going back to your question.
이번 연구는 그 사건과 거의 동시에 진행했다고 봐도 무방해요. 당신과 함께 사건을 조사하면서 새롭게 깨달은 게 많았죠.
It did. Just as Vyn is about to reveal how you helped him in his research, the host calls out to him and gestures that they are all set up and ready to start the interview.
네, 바로 갈게요.
Vyn answers the host, then reaches out to take your hands in his.
지금은 시간이 안 되지만 이따 인터뷰 때 얘기할 거예요. 당신이 관객이 돼서 제 이야기를 들어준다면 재미있을 것 같아요.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. You pat Vyn's arm encouragingly and watch him walk toward the couch. When he takes his seat, you turn back around and make your way to the spot that offers the best view of him. The clapperboard claps and the host soon begins the interview.
윤 교수님, 그럼 우선 코타르 증후군의 임상 증상에 대해 소개해 주시겠어요?
물론이죠. 코타르 증후군이란 허무망상과 부정망상 증상이 두드러지는 질병입니다. 구체적인 증상으로는 자신의 존재에 대해 잘못된 인지를 가진다는 거죠. 예시로 환자의 신체 기관이나 팔다리가 온전한데도 신체의 일부가 없다고 생각하는 겁니다. 심하면 자신의 존재를 부정하고 자신이 이 세상에 존재하지 않는 죽은 사람이라고 생각하는 경우도 있습니다.
설명 감사합니다. 말씀을 듣다 보니까 저도 윤 교수님께 여쭤보고 싶은 질문이 생겼는데요. 다들 아시다시피 코타르 증후군은 매우 희귀한 질병으로 전 세계적으로 지금까지 발견된 사례가 수백 건에 불과하다고 알려져 있습니다. 그리고 방금 말씀해주신 증상은 다른 병의 임상 증상과도 공통점이 많아서요. 그러면 그런 병들은 어떻게 구분할 수 있을까요?
말씀하신 문제는 실제로 연구 초반에 많이 고민했던 부분입니다. 임상 사례가 드문 탓에 증상을 비교하는 것부터 난관이었죠. 그래서 진단할 때 잘못된 판단을 내릴 뻔했어요. 그렇지만 운이 좋게도
Vyn leans forward and rests his elbows in his knees, his hands coming together in a steeple. His gaze flicks across the room and past the cameras to land fleetingly on you. Is he getting to it already? Vyn then turns back toward the host and his gaze noticeably softens.
그때 뜻밖의 걸려온 전화에 상황이 뒤바뀌었죠.
네, 전에 연구팀을 인터뷰할 때 윤 교수님께서 어떤 사건에 대해 언급해 주셨던 걸로 기억합니다. 오늘 이 시간에 어떻게 된 일인지 자세히 들어볼 수 있을까요?
물론이죠. 아주 긴 이야기가 되겠지만요.
Watching the corners of Vyn's lips lift upward slightly, you find yourself thinking back to a time in the past. A time you just made each other's acquaintance, pick a card from his tower of cards, and work on the BUA case together. Every one of these interactions remain vivid in your memories. But did something transpire in those moments you don't know about? Before I realized it, Vin and I already built so many shared memories. These wonderful moments will surely become the treasures we share in the future. Treatment room. Several years back in the treatment room,
그러니까 망상증 치료법으로 한 달간 치료를 진행했는데 환자의 증상이 전혀 호전되지 않았다는 말인가요?
네, 오히려 악화된 양상을 보이고 있습니다.
they approached the patient and a worried expression clouds over the junior doctor's face when he passes Vin the patient's clinical records and diagnostic tests.
무엇보다도 지금 환자랑 정상적인 소통이 불가능해서 쓸만한 정보를 얻을 수가 없다는 게 가장 큰 문제고요. 그래서 당장은 치료를 계속하긴 어려울 것 같습니다.
Vin flips to the last of the patient's records and sets them aside. He contemplates for a brief moment before addressing the completely stumped physician.
여기 적힌 임상 증상에 누락된 내용이나 착오가 없다면 제 생각에 이 환자는 일반적인 망상증이 아닌 것 같아요. 다만 지금은 정보가 부족해서 판단을 내리긴 어렵겠네요.
While tests on physiological functions and hormone levels, among other parameters, provide valuable information in the therapeutic management of mental disorders, patient-physician communication remains paramount in understanding their pathophysiology. More often than not, a physician's expertise isn't the sole factor in determining the duration and efficacy of their therapeutic plan. It is the symptoms and histories reported by patients themselves that help physicians make the most appropriate decisions. Unfortunately for them,
환자가 식사를 거부한 지 며칠이나 지난 터라 말하기도 어려운 상태고 수액으로 간신히 버티고 있어.
furrowing his brow, Professor Charlton takes a step forward among those present at the grand rounds and explains the situation to Vyn.
이 환자가 정말 세계적으로 희귀한 케이스라면 지금 상태로 정확한 진단을 내리기까지 버틸 수 없을까봐 걱정이란 말이지. 아니면 절차대로 특수 약물로 중재적 치료를 해보는 건 어때?
만약 특수약물로도 호전이 없으면
특수약물로 완치는 불가능하겠지만 한 번쯤 시도는 해보자고. 어쨌든 지금처럼 손 놓고 있다가 굶어 죽는 것보다는 나으니까. 노아, 네 생각은 어때?
Vyn falls silent at that, having no answer to the question. The use of experimental drugs can swing the situation either way. To such patients, it could be their last glimmer of hope or the call that sends them straight into the claws of death. This is why Vyn has always only considered experimental drugs to be last-line therapy, despite the pharmaceuticals being formulated by his research center. Unless absolutely necessary, he is never in favor of using them. Realizing how he has hit walls in both his research and therapy plan, Vyn gets abruptly reminded of the phone conversation he had with Eric a while ago. In that call, Eric angrily chastised him for abandoning his family, going as far as to assert that Vyn will never achieve anything in the field of mental health.
설마 이렇게 아버지 말대로 된다고?
Letting out a small sigh, Vyn verbally rubs his brow before turning to the junior doctor.
우선 상황을 보호자에게 알리죠. 약을 쓰든 안 쓰든 보호자의 서명이 필요하니까요. 보호자가 고민하는 동안에도 계속 환자와 소통이 가능한지 확인해줘요.
After assigning everyone their tasks and checking on the patient, Vyn takes a seat on the nearby couch and turns his phone back on. He had an argument with Eric over the phone some time ago because the latter had sent someone to spy on his activities in Salis. Vyn switched his phone off so they wouldn't be disrupted during the grand rounds. It turns out he made the right decision, for as soon as his phone comes back on, Eric's name appears on the screen yet again. Without so much as a moment's hesitation, Vyn rejects the call. But the calls keep coming in. Eric is clearly bent on getting his message across. Having rejected several calls in a row, Vyn swipes across the screen in the opposite direction when the next call comes in, choosing to finally answer it out of exasperation.
제가 여러 번 말했을 텐데요. 설교는 작작... 당신이에요?
The person on the other end of the call sounds taken aback, but she soon asks if something has happened, worry evident in her now cautious voice. A most ordinary question asked out of concern has created ripples of warmth in Vyn's heart. Feeling his throat constrict, he tightens his grip on his phone.
전 괜찮아요. 다른 사람 전화인 줄 알고 그랬는데 너무 놀라지 않았으면 좋겠네요. 그렇군요. PUA 단체가 잠잠하다니 다행이에요. 매일 이렇게 별일은 없었는지 연락해서 알려줘요. 알겠어요. 몸 조심하고 계속 연락해요. 그럼 일찍 쉬어요.
Even after the call ends, the zest he evokes with her spirited voice continues to linger within Vyn. Vyn leans his head back into the couch amid the restful silence, finding solace in the enthusiasm she displays.
그녀가 더 깊이 조사하려는 걸 완강하게 막지 않은 걸 다행으로 여겨야 할까?
If she had taken his advice or if he had kept her away from the case, he wouldn't have received this timely call from her right when he is feeling burnt out.
애초에 막을 수도 없었겠지. 절대 쉽게 포기하는 사람이 아니니까.
He cannot help but wonder, would his research team make more progress with the communication with the patient if they had someone as resourceful and enthusiastic as her to motivate them and keep them going? And would she keep on trying even when it seems impossible for them to communicate with the patient? On this thought, Vyn looks behind him, his gaze peering through the sheer curtains to land on the patient. It is a sight he never expected to see. The perpetual catatonic patient's head is turned toward the curtains, as though he is trying to pick up on something he heard. Vyn immediately springs to his feet and walks toward the patient, who continues staring fixedly at where Vyn was just seated.
방금 내가 한 말에 반응한 건가?
After a moment of contemplation, Vyn fetches some pen and paper. He thinks back to the phone conversation from just now and notes down each and every of his responses. Before long, Vyn makes a call to one of his fellow researchers.
시도해볼 만한 아이디어가 떠올랐어요.
This time, when he ends the call, Vyn no longer finds himself beset by the mental fatigue from before. He looks at the patient on the bed, hardly able to contain his newfound vigor as he, to his own surprise, begins to hope for things to take a turn for the better. He can't help but wonder if this is another miracle that she has gifted him. A future that has been decided for him, a life where he must live as dictated by others. In this instant, he feels the fetters that have been chaining him down all this time shatter into a million pieces. Treatment room.
진행 상황은 어떤가요?
Soon after finishing up the rest of his work, Vyn returns to the treatment room to check in with his research team on their findings for the day. Going off on Vyn's speculation, the researchers have been repeating the lines that he had recorded from his phone call to the patient. Unfortunately, luck doesn't seem to be on their side.
죄송합니다, 윤 교수님. 아직 환자가 반응을 보이는 단어는 없었습니다.
억양이나 말투, 목소리는 바꿔봤나요?
마침 시도하려던 참이었습니다.
Vyn has never pinned his hopes on having his theory proven right there and then, so he has expected as much that progress will be slow. After instructing the junior doctor to continue with the test, Vyn takes a seat on the sofa he had previously occupied and begins to study similar patient cases.
아직 진전이 없어?
Along with the question, Vyn finds himself being offered a warm cup of tea. He accepts it while murmuring in assent. Professor Charlton, who had dropped by after clearing his task, seems to have more questions on his mind though.
뭐? 만나는 사람 생겼어?
네?
Vyn looks up at the older man, surprise and confusion evident in his eyes.
그냥 감이 그렇다는 거니까 깊게 생각할 거 없어. 이것 좀 봐봐.
Professor Charlton flips to the page with Vyn's jotted responses from the phone call and shows it to him.
넌 어떨지 몰라도 난 와이프나 부모님 외에 다른 사람을 이렇게까지 신경 써본 적이 없어. 더군다나 네가 이 정도로 챙기는 사람은 거의 못 본 것 같아서 물어본 거야.
논의해봐야 의미가 없을 것 같네요.
Vyn cuts him off mid-question. After a brief pause, however, he decides to explain himself.
그리고 이 정도는 평범한 배려가 아닐까요? 지금 상대하는 대상이 위험한 단체인 만큼 상황을 아는 사람으로서 최소한 안전은 확인해야 한다고 생각합니다.
네가 그렇다면 그런 거지 뭐.
Professor Charlton chuckles with a knowing look in his eyes. When Vyn does not respond any further, the older man begins rattling off on his point again.
계속 진료하는 건 좋지. 좋은데 치료 과정에 특수약물을 쓰자고 한 것도 네가 결정한 거잖아. 그때 불치병 환자한테 마지막 배려를 해주는구나 싶었다고. 근데 먼저 이렇게 나서서 계획을 바꿀 줄은 몰랐어.
보호자가 포기하지 않았으니까요. 저희도 아예 방법이 없는 것도 아니고요.
Vyn puts aside the case studies he was reading and rubs his hands around a cup of tea to warm himself.
사실 치료 여부와 치료법에 대한 선택권은 환자에게 있습니다. 저희가 할 일은 상황을 사실대로 환자와 보호자에게 전달하는 거죠. 제가 특수약물을 마지막 수단으로 남겨둔 건 환자의 생명을 위한 최후의 보험을 마련해두기 위해서였습니다. 게다가
Vyn turns and glances at the still unresponsive patient and lets out a small sigh, momentarily losing himself in his thoughts.
희귀 임상 사례의 경우 특수약물을 함부로 썼다간 돌이킬 수 없는 결과를 낳거나 사례의 전형성을 잃을 수도 있고요.
As suspected, his textbook response leaves Professor Charlton with no room for argument. Yet, even as he utters those words, Vyn is unable to ignore the way his skin flushes and the racing of his heartbeat. When his thoughts drifted off while he was looking at the patient earlier, it was her face that had flashed across his mind, and that steadfast look she had when she was working on the case involving Walton and the Peway Syndicate. I believe that we shape our own fates. You can't make me give up like this. I'm just doing what I can as an ordinary lawyer.
뭐든지 하기 나름이죠. 더군다나 지금 포기하라고 해도 그럴 수 없고요. 저희는 평범한 의사로서 힘 닿는 데까지 시도해보는 것뿐입니다.
Vyn's words closely echoed those she once said, surprising even himself. Never has he ever imagined that he would one day utter something like this. Yet, as inexplicable as it sounds, her strength and tenacity seem to channel all the way from wherever she is to him. The team soon reaches the end of the day trying to elicit a response from the patient, though none of the recorded responses work. The junior doctor is visibly in low spirits when he comes over to apprise Vyn of their progress.
괜찮아요. 다들 오늘 수고 많았고 내일도 계속 힘내보도록 해요.
Everyone falls silent at Vyn's unusual response, shocked at his words of consolation and affirmation.
다들 왜 그러는 거죠?
아, 다들 교수님이 따뜻하게 말씀해 주실 거라고는 생각을 못해서요.
Just then, Professor Charlton's phone rings. It is only when he quits that his wife is calling to check in on him that the awkward tension in the air finally dissipates.
여보세요? 아, 나 이제 퇴근해서 가려면 좀 걸려. 맛있는 거 해뒀다고? 알았어, 금방 갈게.
Moments into the conversation, Professor Charlton feels a hand on his arm. It is Vyn, who is quietly gesturing in the direction of the patient on the bed. Just like before, he is looking in the direction where the voice came from, seemingly listening in closely on Professor Charlton's phone conversation.
방금 환자가 반응한 건가요?
어쩌면
Vyn pauses for a second before continuing pensively.
감정이 묻어나는 대화만이 환자의 마음을 움직일 수 있는 게 아닐까요?
감정?
Surprised, Professor Charlton nearly blurts out his thoughts, though he holds his tongue in the end. After hanging up, he looks at the researchers and addresses them earnestly.
아예 가능성이 없는 말은 아니야. 그 방향으로 다시 테스트해보자.
Treatment room. Basing off Vyn's latest observation, the research team starts to take turns speaking to their friends, family, and partners in front of the patient. While phone conversations continue to be the only form of communication capable of eliciting a response from the patient, their tireless efforts eventually pays off. The patient is now able to take baby steps in communicating with the researchers.
환자가 한 말로 유추해보면 자신은 교통사고로 세상을 떠났고 지금 사후 세계에 있다고 믿는 것 같습니다. 지금 어떤 목적으로 여기 있는지 모르는 상태입니다. 같은 맥락으로 죽은 사람은 밥을 먹을 필요가 없다고 생각해서 계속 식사를 거부했던 거고요.
역시 그랬군요.
이거에 대해서 어떻게 생각해?
Vyn opens the documents he is holding and arranges them side by side so that the other researchers can see them even from the side. Then he points out the test results for the parietal lobe and the prefrontal cortex.
현재로서는 코타르 증후군일 가능성이 높습니다.
걷는 시체 증후군이라는 거야?
As soon as the question leaves his mouth, everyone exchanges looks of dismay. A look of disappointment adorns the face of every physician familiar with the condition.
들어보니까 수치라든가 환자의 자아인지 상태로 봤을 때 코타르 증후군이 가장 그럴싸하네. 근데 만약에 정말 그 병이라면
단기간에 치료할 수 있는 효과적인 방법은 없을 거야.
Vyn sighed. Clinical cases of a condition this rare are few and far between, even on a global scale. Without sufficient case reports to refer to and compare against, it is unimaginably difficult to manage patients presenting with such afflictions. Moreover, given the patient's state of health, it is nothing short of a miracle that he has managed to hold out long enough for them to even come to a diagnosis.
지금까지 노력해서 얻은 결과가 또 다른 절망이라니.
The young junior doctor's comment is not up an accurate outline of the unpromising situation they are in. Faced with this, even the senior professor on the team, an eternal optimist, turns to Vyn apprehensively.
그럼 이제 어떻게 할까? 환자 상태를 봤을 때 더 지체할 수는 없어.
As it turns out, simply psyching oneself up isn't nearly enough to help them find a breakthrough, especially not in scientific fields of study yet unplumbed. Though his efforts to measure up to her zeal and see things as she would, Vyn has led his team to achieve a milestone that he never thought possible. Yet, in spite of it all, they find themselves hitting a roadblock all the same.
다시 보호자와 자세하게 논의해보죠. 최악의 경우에는 특수 약물을 투여할 수밖에 없을 것 같네요.
At the end of the day, the patient's life comes before everything else. There is no point in putting up a futile struggle if things were to come to that, not over something as sacrosanct as a person's life. But even as he speaks, a voice at the back of his head continues to call out to him, telling him not to give up. Vyn closes his eyes, acknowledging the voice and considering the options he has left. A moment later, he calls out to the doctor on their way to contact the patient's family.
약을 준비하는데 시간이 필요하니 간병인에게 매일 정해진 시간에 환자를 휠체어에 태우고 산책을 다녀오라고 전해줘요. 환자가 세상을 관찰하는 모습을 날마다 기록해서 원인을 찾아보도록 하죠.
As he speaks, Vyn flips open the patient's clinical records for the absent time, zeroing in on the first half pertaining to the patient's family. The patient has never been in a car accident, but he lost his wife and parents to one several months ago. From what little information that they have gathered from the patient thus far, it is likely that the accident is the trigger for his current state. Unfortunately, none of them are aware of the events in that accident.
처음에 환자가 들어올 때 장인 장모님이 병원에 데려왔었죠.
그랬지.
다시 환자 보호자한테 연락해서 교통사고에 대해 자세히 알아봐 주세요.
Having confirmed their next course of action, everyone gets down to work at once, aware that they are racing against time. Vyn too rises to his feet, intending to pull a few favors to get access to more case reports on Cortex syndrome. Research Institute. After corresponding with a few research institutes located abroad, Vyn manages to collect several more case reports for their reference. While limited in number, is ultimately better than nothing. When Vyn leaves the research center to pick up the case reports, an obnoxious voice calls out to him from behind.
도련님! 잠시만 기다려주시죠.
A young man comes up to Vyn, a smarmy smile plastered on his face and a small jewelry box in his hand.
누구?
실은 도련님의 아버님께서 대신 전해달라고 하셔서 잠시만요.
At the mention of his father, Vyn turns and walks off without any hesitation. The young man hurriedly catches up to Vyn, but it is clear that the latter has no intention of entertaining him. An idea comes to him, and the young man quickly composes himself before opening his mouth again.
실은 도련님이 아니라 도련님 여자친구분인 변호사님한테 전해달라고 하셨습니다.
As suspected, Vyn stops in his tracks and looks over his gaze icy. The word Sharara and girlfriend mentioned together, on top of how they had pretended to be a couple in front of Stephen Jacobs. It isn't hard for Vyn to put two and two together.
날 미행하라고 지시하던가요?
미행이라뇨. 다 도련님을 위하시는 것뿐인데요. 그리고 가문 후계자의 아내가 되실 수도 있는 거잖아요? 그리고 아버님의 호의를 거절하지 말라고 전해달라 하셨습니다. 가족이 없는 사람은 결국 시체처럼 살 수밖에 없습니다. 물론 도련님께는 커리어랑 취미가 있으시지만 실상은 누굴 위해 살아가야 하는지 모르고 계시잖아요. 안 그런가요?
Confident that his words will break Vyn's spirit, a look of self-satisfaction appears on the young man's countenance. Yet, contrary to expectation, he only sees Vyn's face darken.
내가 누굴 위해 살아가든 그 사람이 걱정할 바는 아니죠. 당신도 안정적이고 당당하게 돈을 벌고 싶다면 일자리를 바꾸는 게 좋을 거예요.
After leaving behind the frosty parting shot, Vyn turns and leaves without sparing him another glance. A few steps later, a thought suddenly occurs to him, and he reaches for his phone to dial a number that he has become all too well acquainted by now. When he hears the familiar voice on the other end of the line, he finally regains his composure.
여보세요? 저예요. 요즘 들어 미행당하는 느낌은 없었나요? 없었다니 다행이네요. 조심히 다녀오고 일이 끝나면 그쪽으로 갈게요. 같이 계속 조사해보자고요.
After ensuring that the person he is talking to is in not any danger, Vyn lets out a sigh of relief. As he puts away his phone, he suddenly recalls that he had been on his way to collect some case reports before he was so rudely interrupted, and he turns around to make his way to his car, only to find two men gaping at him from behind. The first is Professor Charlton, who seems astonished at the phone conversation he just overheard. The other, seated in a wheelchair that Professor Charlton is pushing, is the patient who they have been taking care of. He even has an arm outstretched, his finger pointing at Vyn despite still wearing a blank look on his face. Treatment room. By now, after so many rounds of tests, Vyn has finally identified the cause of the patient's condition. During all those times when the patient showed signs of response, he had actually been reacting to people uttering the phrase "take care and stay safe" to their partner over the phone.
말투부터 상황, 내용까지 조금도 달라선 안 됩니다. 환자의 아내는 통화 중 교통사고를 당했고 함께 있던 뒷좌석의 부모님과 목숨을 잃었습니다. 환자가 전화로 아내에게 한 마지막 한마디가 말다툼 끝에 내뱉었던 "너나 조심히 다녀" 였더군요.
통화하다가 욱해서 홧김에 한 말이었겠지?
A somber Professor Charlton gazes at the patient, his hands in his pockets.
세상사가 어떻게 될진 아무도 몰라. 이 환자도 그게 아내한테 한 마지막 말이 될 거라곤 생각도 못했을 거야. 그리고 결국 충격을 못 견디고 과도한 스트레스로 병까지 얻게 된 거지. 환자는 네가 통화할 때 보여준 따뜻한 배려랑 같이 나아가고자 하는 태도에 후회랑 죄책감을 느꼈던 것 같아.
그럴지도 모르겠네요. 어찌됐든 해볼 만한 치료 방안이 생긴 것만으로도 다행이에요.
Now that they have identified the cause of the patient's condition and succeeded in getting him to open up to them, Vyn is finally able to draft a new therapeutic plan. The patient soon takes a noticeable turn for the better. On this day, as Vyn makes the rounds with Professor Charlton, they see that the patient has become lucid enough to interact with his caregivers without problems. There is joy and relief in their voices as they discuss the patient's condition again.
환자가 희귀병일 거라곤 생각도 못했는데. 그때 바로 특수약물 처방을 안 해서 다행이었어.
네. 그리고 다른 연구소에서 보내준 사례 덕분에 단기간에 대응할 수 있는 약을 개발할 수 있었습니다. 또 초기에 제가 세웠던 치료 방안에 문제가 있다는 것도 인정합니다. 다행히 어떤 계기로 제때 바로잡을 수 있었지만요.
Vyn, who has been sorting through some documents during the conversation, suddenly pauses. His hands come to rest lightly on the table. As his movements cease, so does the conversation. An awkward silence hangs in the room as both men, absorbed in thought, think of what seems to be the same thing. Professor Charlton clears his throat lightly before tentatively bringing up a name.
맞나?
The sudden, unexpected mention of that familiar name takes Vyn aback, but a look of slight displeasure appears on his face a moment later.
그때 그 사람이랑 얘기할 때 들으셨나요?
우연히 지나가다가 들었어. 아무튼 그 사람인가?
신경 쓰실 부분은 아닌 것 같은데요.
Vyn shoves the stack of documents into Professor Charlton's hand and turns to leave the treatment room.
환자의 상태를 계속 지켜봐야 하니 한가하시다면 진료 기록을 다시 꼼꼼히 체크해 주시죠.
그래.
A half-amused Professor Charlton shakes his head as he watches Vyn walk away without any hesitation whatsoever.
연애하면 다들 한 번쯤은 겪는 시기니까. 미리 익숙해지자.
Research Institute. It is a warm and sunny day outside the research center. Vyn shoves his hands into the pockets of his lab coat as he paces in front of the entrance.
나중에.
Professor Charlton had only said what he did because he didn't know the whole truth. Vyn has never once told him that the so-called girlfriend that the young man mentioned was just an act to lure out Stephen Jacobs. Even so, Vyn is unable to deny that Professor Charlton's mention of her has brought back memories of the time they spent together pretending to be a couple. And these memories have stirred up feelings deep within his heart again.
첫눈에. 또 첫눈에 반한 거야.
He walks up to the steps, yet for some reason he stops in front of them, unable to move his feet as he stares at the glaring sunlight reflected off the edge of the stone steps. The step is barely 8 inches high, but for someone hesitant to venture further, it feels like a deep chasm. There is a ravine within his heart, one that Vyn cannot bring himself to cross out of fear that he will plunge into it. When Vyn looks at what lies on the other side of the ravine, he sees not just her, but also other things. He sees the life that the husband family rejects and the things that Eric has deemed meaningless. Vyn suddenly takes a step back, shying away from the light reflecting off the edge of the stone step.
내가 이제껏 두려워했던 건 앞으로 나아가는 게 아니었을지도 몰라. 스스로 결정한 일에는 죽는 한이 있더라도 물러서지 않겠어. 내가 두려워하는 건 그녀가 내게 다가오는 거겠지.
If she were to take even just a step closer, he would believe it all, even if it were just an act. And he would willingly give her his all and more. The stakes are too high. But
그래도 한 번쯤은 시도해 볼 만하지 않나?
Vyn's phone suddenly vibrates in his pocket. He takes it out and looks at it. It's yet another message of admonition from Eric. He does not open the message to read its full contents. Clutching his phone, his mind wanders back to the time when he just left Sword. Back then, he often experienced a recurring dream. In the dream, he was bound by thorny vines, afraid to take a step forward into the light ahead. In hindsight, that light probably did not symbolize the gods of Sword. Instead, it might have been a representation of everything he has ever longed for. All this while, family and tradition have been the only things holding him back.
때가 됐어.
His thoughts course through the passage of time and arrive at this moment at which he has managed to help a patient with a rare condition get better. Faces flash before his mind's eyes. Junior doctors who are grateful for his gentle attitude and patients who are tormented by remorse toward their families. Senior doctors who have given him support along the way. And her. Perhaps he can give it one more try. Vyn looks back down at his phone, but not to read Eric's text. Instead, he starts typing a message.
죽은 영혼을 만나본 저로서는 가족이 없어도 슬프지 않다는 걸 잘 알고 있어요. 정말 슬픈 삶을 사는 건 가족이 있어도 소중한 줄 모르는 사람이죠. 전 아버지가 말씀하시던 산송장 같은 사람이 되지 않을 거예요. 왜냐하면 저는 절 이끌어주는 빛을 쫓기 시작했거든요.
Living room. In the living room of Vyn's old residence, the interview is finally over. I didn't expect that I'd be involved in the research that way. It's a good thing that you turned down the interview on my behalf. I wouldn't have been able to answer questions related to the topic.
그래도 많은 도움을 받은 건 사실이니까요.
After seeing off the magazine stuff, Vyn takes your hand and leads you to the living room, where he sits you down before making you tea.
우연이었지만 그때 제게 전화해준 덕분에 연구의 방향성을 잡을 수 있었어요.
I was just doing what you asked. You were the one who told me to call you every day to let you know that I was safe. By the way, why didn't you let me get involved when you were conducting tests on the patient?
전화 테스트 말인가요?
Yeah. Leaning against the couch, you asked this question with some puzzlement as you watch Vyn mix you tea. After all, it was my phone call that drew the patient's attention. If we had pretended to date and reenacted the call, it might have triggered the patient to share what was afflicting him sooner.
그 생각도 하긴 했어요.
After the tea is ready, Vyn carries the tray over and sits down beside you. However, he avoids looking at you. As he pours the tea, he gazes at the reflection on the liquid surface, as if he is scrutinizing himself.
그땐 당신과 또 한 번 연인을 연기할 엄두가 나지 않았어요.
Why?
그건 어디까지나 연기니까요. 한 번이면 모를까. 두 번이 되고 세 번이 되면 정말 믿을 것 같았거든요.
Vin. He hands you a teacup before gently taking your hand in his. You feel warmth enveloping you from both your palm and the back of your hand, like a confession of enduring devotion.
누구나 인생이라는 여정 속에서 자신을 가두는 가시나무 감옥을 만나게 돼요. 하지만 자신이 진정으로 원하는 게 무엇인지 알게 해주고 감옥을 벗어날 수 있도록 인도해주는 인연이라는 빛이 나타나기 마련이죠. 그때 전 부모님의 잘못된 모습을 보며 난 그러지 말아야지 다짐했던 터라 첫눈에 반한 사람을 제 빛으로 받아들이기가 쉽지 않았어요. 걱정이 되더라고요. 그 빛이 저를 이끌어주고 싶어 하지 않을까 봐요.
Vin,
근데 다행히 그 빛이 먼저 제게 다가와줬어요.
Huh? The words of protest die on your tongue. Your heart skips a beat as you see the passion and devotion in Vin's eyes.
당신 덕분에 아버지와 같은 길을 걷지 않을 거라는 믿음이 생겼어요. 그래서 감사하는 마음으로 그 빛을 영원히 지켜나가고 싶어요.
Vin. His warm breath draws closer. You are unable to hold back your laughter as you lightly tap the back of his hand. You are grateful you fell for me at first sight. Why do I remember that you weren't as gentle and amiable as you are now when we first met? Besides, didn't you see that you were worried that you would ruin your life if you took the first step? What about now? Do you have any regrets?
그럴 리가요. 평생 후회하지 않을 거예요.
Vin chuckles as he leans against you.
대신 방금 그랬잖아요. 우리가 처음 만났을 때 제가 지금처럼 상냥하고 말이 잘 통하지는 않았다고요. 그 부분에 대해서 변명할 기회가 필요하다고 생각해요.
Haha, if you must, then there are some things that we should talk through one by one. Beyond the path of thorns lies the serenity and beauty of light. Sharing a moment of peace and quiet, you and recount memories from the past. There is no more regret, clamor, or bloodshed from the cage of thorns. Crossing the chasm, he finally catches up to the light and finds everything he has ever dreamed of.